The harsh overhead lighting of Iron Reach Station's gym reflected off Jax Martel's sweat-slicked skin as he pushed through his final set. 800 kilograms of scavenged metal plates rattled on the reinforced bar as he completed his 10th rep. Even in the station's artificial gravity, it was an impressive feat. Last one. He growled to himself, arms trembling with exertion. The veins in his massive forearms stood out like steel cables beneath his skin as he locked his elbows. For 3 seconds, he held the weight there, suspended, before carefully guiding it back to the rack with a metallic clang that echoed through the empty gym. Jax sat up and wiped his face with a threadbare towel. At 220 centimeters tall, with shoulders twice as broad as the average Terran, he was a mountain of muscle in human form. 20 years of relentless training had sculpted his body into something that seemed almost inhuman, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed in the fighting pits of Iron Reach. The station chronometer indicated it was already third shift. Most of the station's inhabitants, a motley collection of species from across 17 systems, were either sleeping or engaging in the various illicit activities that kept the frontier outpost's underground economy thriving. Jax preferred the solitude of these hours. Fewer stares, fewer whispers. As he gathered his things, the gym door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. A slender figure with iridescent scales and 4 jointed arms stepped inside, golden eyes blinking nervously in the bright light. Kiro. Jax acknowledged the Cephalian dockworker with a nod. Bit late for a workout, isn't it? Not here for exercise, Kiro replied, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into the common tongue with only a slight delay. Message from Captain Voss. She wants to see you, now. Jax frowned. Sarah Voss ran the station's most profitable fighting circuit and coincidentally held most of Jax's considerable gambling debts. A summons at this hour couldn't be good news. Did she say what it's about? Kiro's upper arms performed a nervous gesture that approximated a shrug. Only that it's urgent, and that it involves Warlord Garx. At the mention of the station's de facto ruler, Jax felt his stomach tighten. Garx had taken control of Iron Reach 3 standard years ago, transforming it from a rough but functional trading post into his personal fiefdom. The Drakid warlord demanded tribute from every business and inhabitant, enforcing his will through a cadre of battle-hardened Marines from his own species. I'll be there in 20, Jax said, grabbing his bag. Just need to clean up. She said immediately. Kiro insisted, all 4 hands fidgeting. And she mentioned your debt. Jax sighed and tossed his towel aside. Fine, lead the way. The corridors of Iron Reach were a chaotic maze of retrofitted compartments and hastily welded additions. Originally constructed from the gutted hull of an ancient Terran dreadnought, the station had grown organically over decades, each new arrival adding to its sprawling, disorganized structure. Lighting panels flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows as they walked. How's dockwork treating you? Jax asked, ducking to avoid a low-hanging bundle of conduits. Busy, Kiro replied. 3 merchant vessels docked yesterday. 1 carried Procyon silk. His scales rippled in what Jax had come to recognize as excitement. Very valuable, very fragile. Garx take his cut? 40%, Kiro said to his translator, unable to convey the bitterness in his native clicks, plus inspection fees. They turned down a narrow passageway that led to the entertainment district, a garish collection of fighting pits, gambling dens, and other establishments catering to the baser desires of a dozen different species. Captain Voss's office was located above her premier venue, the Crucible, where Jax had fought and sometimes lost too many times to count. A pair of hulking Vargur, canine humanoids with enhanced muscle density, stood guard outside. They recognized Jax immediately, stepping aside without comment. Their yellow eyes followed him as he entered, a reminder that in this part of the station, his reputation preceded him. Inside, Captain Sarah Voss stood by a viewport overlooking the fighting pit below, a former Terran Marine with a network of scars across her dark skin. She'd found her niche on Iron Reach, arranging bouts between combatants of all species. She turned as they entered, her cybernetic left eye whirring faintly as it focused on Jax. "You're late," she said, though Kiro had delivered the summons less than 15 minutes ago. "I came straight from training." Jax replied. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until morning? Voss gestured for Kiro to leave. The Cephalian hesitated, looking at Jax with an expression that might have been concern, before slipping out. The door sealed with a soft click. Warlord Garx has a proposition for you, Voss said, moving to a dispenser and pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. She offered one to Jax, who declined with a shake of his head. She shrugged and downed both. A chance to clear your debt to me, and him. I'm listening, Jax said, though wariness crept into his voice. Anything involving Garx was bound to be dangerous, illegal or both. There's a battlecruiser in Dock Bay 17. Voss continued. Garx's forces commandeered it from a rival faction last week. Impressive vessel. Arcturus class. Nearly a kilometer long. What does that have to do with me? Voss's organic eye fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Garx wants proof of your loyalty. He's heard stories about your strength, claims you could press the weight of a small shuttle. He wants a demonstration. Jax barked a laugh. What? He wants me to lift the entire ship. Not the whole cruiser, just a section of hull plating. Voss activated a holographic display on her desk. A 3-dimensional schematic of the battlecruiser appeared, rotating slowly. She zoomed in on a curved piece of armor, plating near the bow. This piece, it was damaged in the firefight. Needs to be replaced anyway. Jax studied the image, calculating. That's at least 3 tons, maybe more. 3.7, to be exact. Voss said, in standard gravity. Impossible, Jax said flatly. Even I have limits. Garx doesn't think so. Voss deactivated the hologram. He's offering to wipe your debt clean if you succeed, plus a permanent position in his inner circle. And if I refuse? Voss's expression hardened. Then he collects what you owe him, by any means necessary. The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. Jax knew what that meant. On Iron Reach, those who couldn't pay their debts often disappeared. Or worse, ended up in the slave pits of the mining colonies in the outer system. When? 3 days from now. Public event. The whole station will be watching. Voss poured herself another drink. I've arranged for you to have access to the docking bay for training purposes. Jax's mind raced. 3 days to prepare for an impossible feat. But what choice did he have? I'll need equipment and help. Voss nodded. Whatever you need, within reason, just don't disappoint him. Jax, she gestured toward the door. Garx doesn't handle disappointment well. As Jax turned to leave, she added, One more thing. A squad of Garx's Marines will be observing your preparations. Consider them both motivation and insurance. Outside. Jax found Kiro waiting, pretending to fix a malfunctioning light panel. The Cephalian fell into step beside him as they headed toward the residential sector. Bad news? Kiro asked after they'd walked in silence for several minutes. You could say that, Jax replied, his voice grim. I need a favor. Of course, friend. Kiro's translator couldn't quite capture the warmth in his response, but Jax heard it nonetheless. I need access to zero-G training equipment and information about Arcturus-class battlecruisers, specifically their hull composition. Kiro's golden eyes blinked rapidly. You're planning something dangerous. Not planning, Jax corrected. Being volunteered by Voss and Garx. The warlord? Kiro's scales paled slightly. What does he want with you? He wants me to bench press a piece of battlecruiser hull plating. 3.7 tons of it. Kiro stopped walking, all 4 arms frozen in shock. That's not possible. Even for you. That's what I said. Jax replied, continuing down the corridor. After a moment, Kiro hurried to catch up. But I need to try. Otherwise... He didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone on Iron Reach knew what happened to those who crossed Warlord Garx. I know someone in maintenance. Kiro said after a moment. They might have access to the schematics you need, and there's an old zero-G chamber in the lower decks. Rarely used. Jax nodded gratefully. Thanks, Kiro, I owe you. No debt between friends. The Cephalian replied, a human phrase he'd clearly picked up from Jax. We start tomorrow? No, Jack said, his expression hardening with determination. We start now. The maintenance level of Iron Reach was a labyrinth of humming machinery, exposed conduits, and recycled air that tasted faintly of oil and ozone. Kiro led Jax through a series of increasingly narrow passages until they reached a sealed hatch marked with faded warning symbols in 3 different languages. Zero-G chamber, Kiro explained, his lower arms working on the control panel while his upper limbs kept watch down the corridor. Used for testing station-keeping thrusters. Not used since new systems installed. The hatch wheezed open, revealing a spherical chamber approximately 20 meters in diameter. The walls were scarred and dented, evidence of previous testing gone awry. At the center floated several pieces of equipment, anchored by thin tethers to prevent them from drifting. Perfect, Jack said, stepping inside. The artificial gravity immediately lessened, giving him the peculiar floating sensation of reduced weight. Can you set it to full 0G? Kiro manipulated the controls, and Jax felt his feet leave the floor. He'd trained in low gravity before, but full weightlessness was a different experience. His muscles, accustomed to working against constant resistance, felt oddly slack. How will this help? Kiro asked, remaining by the hatch with one hand on the gravity controls. The demonstration will be in standard gravity. I need to understand how the weight behaves, Jax explained, pushing off gently toward the center of the chamber. In 0G, I can feel the mass without fighting the weight, then gradually increase gravity to build up resistance. Kiro looked skeptical but nodded. What about hull specifications? Working on it, came a new voice from the doorway. Jax turned, awkwardly in the weightlessness, to see Captain Voss standing there, a datapad in her hand. She stepped into the chamber, adjusting to the zero gravity with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent time in space. Thought you might need this, she said, pushing the pad toward Jax. It drifted across the space between them. Complete specifications on Arcturus-class hull plating, material composition, stress tolerances, the works. Jax caught the pad, eyeing Voss suspiciously. Why are you helping me? Because contrary to popular belief, I don't want to see you fail. She replied. Her cybernetic eye whirred as it adjusted to the lighting. If you pull this off, it's good for business. The man who bench-pressed a Battlecruiser hull? I could sell out the Crucible for a year with you as the main attraction. Always about profit, Jax muttered, scrolling through the specifications. What he saw didn't encourage him. The hull was a composite of titanium alloys, carbon nanofibers, and other materials he'd never even heard of. Designed to withstand micrometeorite impacts and energy weapons fire, it was both incredibly strong and surprisingly flexible. Not just profit. Voss said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. Garx is planning something. This demonstration, it's not just about your debt or even your strength. He's sending a message. To whom? That's what I'd like to know. Voss replied, but whatever it is, I don't think it's good for anyone on this station who isn't Drakid. Jax frowned, looking up from the pad. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been on this station longer than Garx, and I've seen what happens when warlords like him consolidate power. Her organic eye hardened. It never ends well for the rest of us. Before Jax could respond, a commotion echoed from the corridor outside. Kiro let out a series of rapid clicks that his translator didn't even attempt to render into common speech. Company, Voss said, pushing herself toward the hatch. Garx's Marines, right on schedule. 4 Drakid Marines entered the chamber, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Each stood slightly taller than Jax, with leathery gray skin and elongated skulls that gave them a predatory appearance. Their 4 eyes, too large, too small, surveyed the chamber with obvious disdain. This is your training facility? The lead Marine's voice was a gravelly rumble, his translator rendering it with military precision. Pathetic. Jax said nothing, continuing to study the datapad as if the Marine's arrival was of no consequence. Warlord Garx has assigned us to monitor your preparation. The Marine continued, to ensure you do not disappoint him. Lucky me, Jax murmured, still not looking up. The Marine pushed off from the hatch, propelling himself toward Jax with alarming speed. One clawed hand reached out to snatch the datapad, but Jax was faster. Despite his bulk, he twisted in the zero gravity with surprising agility, moving the pad out of reach. Careful, Jax said, finally meeting the Marine's 4 eyes. Wouldn't want to start something you can't finish. The Marine's facial ridges darkened, a sign of anger in Draked's. You think too highly of yourself, Terran. Even with your abnormal strength, you are nothing compared to a Draked warrior. Jax finally tucked the pad into his pocket and gave the Marine his full attention. Care to test that theory? Stand down, Lieutenant, Voss interjected, positioning herself between them. Warlord Garx wants his demonstration. Can't have his star performer injured beforehand. Can he? The Marine hesitated, then backed off with obvious reluctance. 3 days, Terran. Then we will see what you're made of. Also. The next 72 hours passed in a grueling cycle of training, analysis, and preparation. Jax alternated between strength exercises in varying gravity levels and studying the Battlecruiser's schematics. Kiro proved invaluable, using his connections among the station's maintenance crews to gather additional information and equipment. The Draked Marines maintained their vigilant watch, occasionally making threatening comments or attempting to disrupt his training. Jax ignored them, focusing entirely on the impossible task ahead. He slept little, ate precisely calculated meals for maximum energy, and pushed his already extraordinary physique to its absolute limits. On the morning of the 3rd day, Kiro found Jax in the zero-G chamber, floating motionless in meditation. It's time, the Cephalian said softly. They're preparing the demonstration area now. Jax opened his eyes. Any word on attendance? The entire station. Kiro replied. Garx has ordered all non-essential operations suspended. Everyone must attend. That was unexpected. Why would he want everyone to watch? I've been asking around, Kiro said, his scales shifting nervously. Rumors say Garx is expecting important visitors, representatives from another Draked faction, some kind of negotiation or alliance. The pieces began to fall into place. So I'm a demonstration of his power. Look what forces I command, even Terrans with superhuman strength. I believe so, Kiro agreed. But there's more. The hull section. It's not just ordinary plating. Jax's attention sharpened. What do you mean? A friend in dock maintenance ran deeper scans. The section contains embedded bioneural circuitry. It's part of the ship's sensory system. Why would that matter? Kiro's golden eyes blinked rapidly. Because it means the ship can feel what happens to it, and it can communicate that feeling to other ships. Jax considered this new information as he propelled himself toward the hatch. You're saying the ship is sentient? Not fully. But the Arcturus class has a bio-AI network integrated throughout its hull. It's how it responds so quickly to damage in battle. Kiro followed Jax out into the corridor. The section Garx chose isn't random. It's a primary sensory node. The implications were staggering. If the ship could feel, could communicate. Jax's demonstration wasn't just for the station inhabitants or the visiting Draked faction. It was a message to any other ships that might be connected to the bio-AI network. Thank you, Kiro, Jax said as they approached the turbolift that would take them to the docking bay. Whatever happens today. We are friends. Kiro interrupted, placing one hand on Jax's massive shoulder. No matter what happens. The docking bay had been transformed into a makeshift arena. A reinforced platform had been constructed at the center, surrounded by tiered seating filled with the station's diverse inhabitants. Above them all, a transparent viewport revealed the void of space, scattered with distant stars and the looming presence of the gas giant that Iron Reach orbited. The Battlecruiser itself dominated one entire side of the massive bay, its sleek, predatory lines a testament to advanced engineering. Even damaged and powered down, it exuded menace. A section of hull plating, curved and gleaming, had been removed and placed on the platform. It was larger than Jax had anticipated, nearly 4 meters across and shaped like a convex shield. Captain Voss met them at the entrance to the arena floor, her expression unreadable. "Quite the turnout," she commented, gesturing to the packed stands. "Garx's visitors arrived an hour ago. They're in his private viewing box." Jax followed her gaze to an elevated platform where several Drakids in elaborate armor sat watching the proceedings. At their center was Warlord Garx himself, his massive form dwarfing even his fellow Drakids. Unlike his Marines, Garx's exoskeletal armor was adorned with trophies, fragments of rival ships, insignia from conquered outposts, and other grim souvenirs of his many victories. "Any last-minute advice?" Jax asked, stretching his enormous arms. "Don't fail," Voss replied bluntly. "Garx has hostages." Jax froze mid-stretch. "What hostages?" "Maintenance crew, engineers, people who keep this station running." Voss's organic eye fixed on him. "Including your friend Kiro's clutchmates." Jax turned to Kiro, who stood rigid with shock. "You knew about this?" "No," the Cephalian whispered, his translator barely picking up the sound. "They were on shift rotation, I thought. Garx isn't taking chances." Voss continued. "If you fail, he's launching them in a drop pod, without heat shields." The implication was clear. They would burn up in the gas giant's atmosphere. Jax's resolve hardened. What had been a personal challenge, albeit a forced one, was now something far more significant. Lives depended on him accomplishing the impossible. "When do I start?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "Now," Voss replied as a horn blared through the docking bay. "That's your cue." Jax stepped onto the arena floor alone, the collective gaze of thousands following his movement toward the platform. The hull section waited, gleaming under the harsh lights. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns etched into its surface, not decorative, but functional. If Kiro was right, those patterns were part of the bioneural network. A Drakid announcer's voice boomed through the bay, first in the clicking language of the Drakids, then in common speech. "Behold the strength of Warlord Garx's forces. Today, the Terran known as Jax Martel will demonstrate the power that serves our great leader." The crowd responded with a mixture of cheers and murmurs. Jax ignored them, focusing entirely on the task before him. He circled the hull section, examining it from all angles, planning his approach. Standard benching technique wouldn't work. The piece was too awkwardly shaped. He would need to adapt. The announcer continued. "The Terran will attempt to lift the hull section of an Arcturus-class battlecruiser, a feat never before accomplished by any being." Jax positioned himself beneath the curved section, lying on his back on the reinforced platform. The metal was cold against his skin. He reached up, finding purchase on the edges of the hull piece. The awkward angle would make it even more difficult, but there was no other way. As his hands gripped the hull, he felt a strange vibration, almost like a pulse. The bioneural network, responding to his touch. For a brief moment, he thought he sensed something like curiosity emanating from the metal. Then reality reasserted itself as the weight settled onto his hands. Even with his phenomenal strength, the pressure was immense. His arms shook with the effort of just holding the hull piece in position, let alone lifting it. The crowd fell silent, watching. In his peripheral vision, Jax could see the Drakid Marines moving to form a perimeter around the platform. Their leader, the same lieutenant who had confronted him in the zero-G chamber, wore a satisfied smirk. He clearly expected failure. Jax drew a deep breath, centering himself. He thought of Kiro's clutchmates, innocent station workers now held hostage. He thought of all the times he'd pushed past what should have been his physical limits. And he thought of his own past, the accident that had nearly killed his younger sibling back on Earth, the guilt that had driven him to the frontier in the first place. With a primal roar that echoed through the cavernous docking bay, Jax pushed upward. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The hull section remained immobile, its weight crushing down on him. Then, millimeter by millimeter, it began to rise. The veins in Jax's neck and arms stood out like steel cables as he fought against the impossible mass. In the artificial gravity of the docking bay, 3.7 tons was still 3.7 tons, but Jax had spent 3 days studying the physics, understanding the mass distribution, and preparing his body. Now he put that knowledge to use, finding the precise angle that would allow maximum leverage. The hull section continued to rise, centimeter by centimeter. The crowd's silence gave way to scattered gasps and exclamations. No one had actually expected him to lift it, not even Garx. Jax suspected this was supposed to be his humiliation, his failure. As the hull piece reached the halfway point of a standard bench press, Jax felt something change. The vibration he'd sensed earlier intensified, becoming almost a hum. The bio-neural network was fully active now, responding to the stress. And through his contact with the hull, Jax sensed something else, alarm. The ship was afraid. With that realization came another, more startling one. If the ship could feel fear, could communicate it, perhaps Jax could use that. Summoning his remaining strength, he drove upward with everything he had. The hull section rose to arm's length, his elbows locking as he held the massive weight aloft. The platform beneath him groaned with the strain, and the gravity stabilizers throughout the bay flickered momentarily. Then, with deliberate force, Jax twisted slightly, applying asymmetric pressure to the hull section. The composite material, designed to flex under specific types of stress, began to creak, not enough to break. He didn't want to destroy it, but enough to trigger its damage response systems. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The bioneural patterns across the hull section flared with bioluminescent light, pulsing in what Jax somehow knew was a distress signal. Simultaneously, the massive battlecruiser in the dock came partially alive, its own neural network responding to the signal from its severed piece. Warning klaxons blared throughout the bay as the cruiser's defense systems activated. The Drakid Marines, who had been watching Jax's demonstration with growing unease, suddenly found themselves receiving alert signals directly to their armor's integrated communications. Jax heard the lieutenant barking orders, his translator struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire Drakid speech, something about ship awakening and abort mission. In the stands, confusion gave way to panic as spectators witnessed the dormant battlecruiser powering up systems that had been deactivated for days. Emergency lights strobed across its hull, and several weapons ports began to cycle open. Through it all, Jax maintained his hold on the hull section, arms trembling with exertion but refusing to yield. The bio-neural network continued to pulse, sending its distress signal to the ship and, Jax suspected, to any other Arcturus-class vessels that might be in range. In Garx's viewing box, the warlord had risen to his feet, his four eyes fixed on the battlecruiser with an expression of shock and rage. His visitors were already retreating, their postures conveying alarm. The Drakid Marines began to fall back, their disciplined formation dissolving as conflicting orders and warnings flooded their communication systems. Their lieutenant made one last attempt to restore order, but then something new appeared on the main viewport above the bay. A massive shape eclipsed the stars, another Arcturus-class battlecruiser, this one fully powered and combat-ready. It had appeared seemingly from nowhere, responding to the distress signal of its sister ship. That was the breaking point. The Drakid Marines abandoned their posts entirely, rushing toward their own ships docked at the far end of the bay. The lieutenant, after a moment's hesitation, followed them. Whatever mission Garx had planned, whatever demonstration of power he had intended, was now in ruins. With a final surge of strength, Jax carefully lowered the hull section back to the platform. His muscles screamed in protest, pushed far beyond their normal limits. But he had done it, not just lifted the impossible weight, but used it to send a message that had disrupted Garx's entire operation. As he rolled away from the platform, gasping for breath, the crowd erupted in chaotic noise. Some fled toward the exits, while others stood watching in amazement as the dormant battlecruiser continued its partial activation sequence. Through the viewport, they could see Garx's Marines boarding their smaller vessels, preparing for emergency departure. Kiro pushed through the confusion, all four arms reaching to help Jax to his feet. "You did it!" the Cephalian exclaimed, his translator unable to fully capture his awe. "You actually did it!" The hostages, Jax managed between labored breaths. Are they safe? Voss is securing their release now, Kiro assured him. Garx is too busy dealing with his fleeing allies to worry about hostages. As if summoned by her name, Captain Voss appeared beside them, her expression a mixture of disbelief and calculation. You magnificent bastard, she said, her cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned Jax for injuries. You turned the ship against them. Not exactly, Jax replied, finally regaining some composure. I just made it send a distress call. Didn't expect another cruiser to show up, though. Neither did Garx, Voss said with a grim smile. Those visitors were representatives from a rival faction. He was planning to use your demonstration as proof of his superior forces, then launch a surprise attack on their fleet. And now? Now they're running for their lives, thinking the Arcturus fleet has somehow identified them as targets. Voss shook her head in amazement. You just prevented a war, Jax, and completely undermined Garx's authority in the process. Around them, the panic was beginning to subside as it became clear that the battlecruiser wasn't actually attacking. Its systems, partially awakened by the distress signal, were cycling through automated protocols before settling back into dormancy. The second cruiser remained visible in the viewport, maintaining position but taking no hostile action. What happens now? Jax asked, feeling the full weight of exhaustion settling over him. Now? Voss looked around at the docking bay, where the power dynamics of Iron Reach had been irrevocably altered in the span of minutes. Now we negotiate. From a position of strength. The aftermath of what quickly became known as the bench press incident transformed Iron Reach. Warlord Garx, his authority severely undermined by the public failure of his demonstration and the flight of his Marines, was forced to accept a power-sharing arrangement with a hastily formed station council. Captain Voss, leveraging her connections throughout the station, emerged as one of the council's key members. For Jax, the changes were equally profound. His gambling debts were officially pardoned, not just by Voss, but by formal declaration of the council. More significantly, he was offered a position as the station's peace envoy, a role that would utilize his reputation to negotiate with visiting ships and factions. 1 week after the incident, Jack stood in an observation lounge overlooking the sprawling expanse of Iron Reach. The station's lights created a constellation of human habitation against the backdrop of space, with the massive gas giant glowing beneath them. It looks different somehow, he commented as Kiro joined him at the viewport. Brighter. Hope tends to do that. The Cephalian replied. His translator had been upgraded, one of many small improvements already implemented by the Council. People move differently when they're not afraid. Jax nodded, understanding. For years, he had drifted through life on the frontier, seeking something he couldn't quite define. Purpose, perhaps, or redemption for past failures. In the most unlikely circumstances, he had found both. Have you decided? Kiro asked after a comfortable silence. About the envoy position? I have, Jack said, turning from the viewport to face his friend. I'm accepting it, on one condition. Which is? That you're appointed as my advisor. Jack smiled at Kiro's surprised expression. I may have the strength to impress visitors, but you have the wisdom to guide negotiations. I need that. Kiro's scales rippled with emotion. I would be honored, friend. A notification chimed on Jax's comm unit, Captain Voss requesting their presence at a council meeting. New visitors had arrived, representatives from a trading consortium interested in establishing regular routes to Iron Reach, now that Garx's oppressive regime had been curtailed. As they headed toward the council chambers, Jax reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A forced demonstration of strength had become a moment of liberation, not just for him, but for an entire station. The impossible weight he had lifted had broken more than physical limits. It had shattered cycles of fear and oppression. In the distance, visible through a passing viewport, the Arcturus-class battlecruiser still sat in its dock. Engineers were examining its bio-neural network, learning its secrets. The sister ship that had responded to its distress call remained in orbit, a silent guardian that had, unwittingly, helped usher in a new era for Iron Reach. Jax Martel, the Terran bodybuilder who had bench-pressed a battlecruiser hull and sent alien marines fleeing in terror, strode forward into that new era, his immense strength now matched by a clear purpose and the knowledge that sometimes the heaviest weights we lift are the ones that free us all.